I'm mainly focusing on fantasy books that are like high fantasy. I was gonna Google before whether that was an accurate statement to make, but I didn't, so just trust me. But basically, there's like lots of different kind of subcategories of fantasy, and often I feel like the main two from what I've seen is like urban fantasy and high fantasy. And urban fantasy is like fantasy that's like set in our world, like on Earth with modern technology often, but there's like fantasy influences. So to be fair, some of those ones that I just read that I said had inspired me to read were quite urban fantasy because it was set on Earth, but there was like the Fae coming into Earth. Or sometimes you do get the ones where it's like partially set on Earth and then they go to another world rather than being fully set in another world, which is what high fantasy tends to be. It's like a whole other game. It's a whole other world where like Earth doesn't exist. And it's just a whole new landscape, a whole new magic system, a whole new religion and world building. And like some of the stuff that I mentioned earlier, like that's the kind of area of fantasy I'm focusing on today. I'll probably do a video at some point recommending some of my like non-high fantasy recommendations. But I love high fantasy. And I probably prefer it to some of the not lesser, but like urbaner fantasy stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. And in that vein, there was a couple ones that I wanted to like recommend, but they're almost like kind of dystopian in the sense that it's set really far into the future. So it's kind of set on Earth, but it's not, but there's like magic, you know? Like for example, I was thinking about recommending the like Cinder book series. I don't remember what the actual series is called, but the first book is called Cinder by Marissa Mayer. But I was like, actually, that doesn't really count necessarily as high fantasy, and it is kind of dystopian in nature anyway, so I was like, it doesn't quite work. But in the sense that like that's set in like the world years down the line, you know? And there's quite a few with that kind of like vibe, you know, where it's like, oh, this is set in... And to be fair, actually, one of the ones on my list, do you know what? Let's just not be too specific. Let's just go with the vibes, okay? Because I just realized one of the ones on my list is set in, like, historical China. So, technically, that is set on the world. But don't worry about it, is what I'm going to say. And we're just going to go forth with vibes in our heart and acceptance, you know? I will say as well, I'm going to start with YA novels and then move on to adult fantasy novels. I think the main difference you'll find between YA novels and like adult novels in the fantasy genre is that YA typically has a lot stronger like romance subplot, and there's kind of the knowledge that like everything's gonna work out okay. I feel like YA fantasy has a lot more of like the like happy ending style like vibe the whole way through, where it's like things are going wrong and it's terrible and there's some really dark themes and some really like horrible stuff happening, but you kind of know that it's all gonna work out okay in the end. Whereas adult fantasy, you don't have that. There's like very rarely, you can have obviously romance subplot in fantasy, but a lot of the time it's not as prominent as you would find it in YA, and it doesn't always work out well. And again, the themes are like very dark, and they can be really dark in YA, but they're so much darker a lot of the time in adult fantasy, and there is no guarantee that everything is going to work out well. You're just kind of crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. Like, it's very like realistic and raw, like, because a lot of them are about war, low-key. Fantasy books just love war. So it can be just really brutal, and you're just like, there's no guarantee that like there's gonna be happiness for these characters, but rooting for you. And the world building is often very like sophisticated and complex, and that doesn't mean that it's not for YA, but YA can sometimes just be a little bit of, it's so fun and cutesy, you know, and then adult fantasy and you're like, oh no. So the first one I would recommend, all of my favorite books are fantasy books, so this is one of them. I love this series. You've probably heard of it before, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to recommend it to you, because I think it deserves to be read, and that is The Grishaverse by Leigh Bardugo, in particular Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. It's so good. It is incredible. What I would say, the way the series is laid out, right? Because it's like a whole universe where everything is all set in the same land. I don't remember what the land's called. Okay, it's been a while. But it has the first 3 books to like set up the majority of the world building, and that's the Shadow and Bone trilogy. And I did read those first, and I do think that reading those helps you understand what kind of happens in the later books. Because I know a lot of people, because Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom are my favourite ones, and I do think they're the best ones of the whole series. And so I'm aware that some people aren't always fully committed to wanting to read like a really big series, because the whole series is like 9 books long in total, if you're not including like some of the short stories and stuff as well. And obviously to read Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, you technically need to read 3 books before you even get to that. But it is set in like a different part of the same world. So there is also the kind of thing of like you can read them without reading the first 3. But I will say that it does definitely help to have read the first 3 before you read those 2. I would say though, a lot of people don't like Shadow and Bone very much, but I did genuinely really enjoy it. And as far as like starting fantasy and getting into fantasy, that is a pretty good place to start. So yeah, that's my take on it. But obviously, free will, do what you want. If you want to just go ahead and read Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, which you should, that one, there's no exceptions. You have to read those, actually. Free will doesn't exist in that instance. But if you don't want to read the Shadow and Bone series beforehand, like, that's fine, go for it. You'll just have to spend a little bit of extra time being like, what is going on? The first trilogy is very focused on like, and here's the magic system, and here's all of these people with the magic system like studying at an institute, and then something goes wrong and there's a dictator and they all have to work together to stop the dictator. There is very good found family in the 3rd book in that trilogy, and so again, if you like found family, I feel like read it, you know. And there's like a romance subplot, there's kind of like an enemies to lovers, like, but then also not really. Friends to lovers, yes. There's a lot of I don't think books should be wholly based on their tropes, but I'm aware that they can be helpful tools to get you interested in like what you want to read and the kind of things you enjoy, which is why I'm throwing them out there. My favorite trope of all time is found family, and Six of Crows, that duology, masters the found family thing. Like, the relationship and the bond that the 6 main characters have with each other is incredible. It's basically these 6 characters who, some of them have known each other and been working together for a while, and then they kind of take on board like 3 new members, as it were, and they all come from different backgrounds and they all have different experiences and different talents, and they formed this group together in order to go and form this like major heist in this ice court, which is supposed to be like indestructible, like you can't get in, and if you get in you can't get out, in order to rescue this guy who's created this like drug which enhances like the magical powers. It feels funny calling it magic powers because it feels so like silly childish, whereas like when you read it you're like, no, this is like a really sophisticated thing that these people have. But yeah, so it focuses a lot more on like all of these people's talents and experiences growing up in this world. And they don't have magic, and that's just, but they're still cool. It's like Batman, you know. It's like Batman. He doesn't have powers, but he still goes in and he fucks shit up, you know. And we love that for him, and we like Batman, I think. And it is very like, they're all very morally grey, but there's really good romance subplot. There's really good romance subplot. I lost my train of thought. Anyway, basically, if you didn't catch my drift, read Six of Crows, but read that whole series, to be honest. It's an incredibly good. The world building is really interesting, really good. The way the characters are written and the dynamics between the characters are all phenomenal. Like, you really do, you're just like, wow, these people are friends. And like, it's funny and it's kind of lighthearted, but it also balances it out really well with like the serious themes and the genuine stuff that's going on. And the relationships are like, there's some really good like slow burn in there. Like, you're literally like giggling and kicking your feet over the fact that like these people like touched, you know, not kissed, not slept with each other, just like their pinkies made contact, and it's like, oh, they're in love, they love each other, you know. It's genuinely like, it's so good. It's an incredibly good series. Go read it, to be honest. The next one I would recommend for like YA fantasy is The Remnant Chronicles by Mary E. Pearson. This one, it is a similar situation to the Grishaverse in the sense that you've kind of got like the first trilogy and then there's a duology that follows. I read the first trilogy probably when I was 15, 16, but I reread them recently and I didn't love them as much as I did when I first read them. When I first read them, I gave the first one 4 stars and the second and third one 5 stars because I just really enjoyed them so much. But when I read them recently, I was like, I would just give them all like 4 stars. But they're still very, very good, I would say. It's about this girl who, she's a princess and she's set to marry this prince right off the bat at the start of the novel, but she doesn't want to because she's a feminist. And she's like, I don't know who this guy is. Like, she thinks he's so much older than her. And she's like, no, I don't want to actually. So she runs away with her bestie, her maidservant, and they go in, live in the maidservant's like town where she grew up. And obviously everyone's not really happy about that because she was supposed to form like a political, she was supposed to cement these like 2 kingdoms coming together in this like political negotiation, you know? And so this guy from this other kingdom who's not involved with those 2 kingdoms, he's trying to obviously grow in power to like compete with those kingdoms, and he sends an assassin to kill her because that would help him, I guess. And the prince of the guy she was supposed to marry, he's so like, you know what, this kind of bothered me, this kind of really irked me, and I need to see who scoundered, who sploundered, who, what's that word, I don't know, who missed out, I guess, who missed out on the opportunity of marrying me. That's crazy. Like, I gotta go find this girl. And so the assassin and the prince both set out to find her. They both find her. And then she's, obviously there's kind of a bit of a love triangle moment, but the love triangle's written really well. But the really interesting part about it is that when she both meets them, they obviously both give fake names. And you don't know which one is the prince and which one is the assassin. You know that both of them are, you know, the prince and the assassin. That's who they are, but you don't know which one is which. Because you get certain perspectives where it's like the title of the perspective is like the assassin or the prince. And then you get other perspectives where it's like Cal or whatever the guy's name is. And so you don't actually know whether Cal is the assassin or Cal is the prince. Does that make sense? Are you with me? So it's really interesting because the whole time she's like low-key falling in love with one of them and you're like, is this the prince or is this the assassin? Like, we don't know. And it's just really interesting. And then, so that's like the first one, and then I can't really give away what happens in the second one and the third one, but she starts to like go back and she's like, okay, wait, I'm gonna be a princess again, you know, I've lived in the shadows for too long and now I've got to get politically involved. Not really by choice, not initially, but then it becomes a choice, you know, and it's just really good. Like I feel like the political elements of it, they're not too complicated and they're not too strong, but it's kind of like fun, and you're like, yes. And then she's completely just girl bossing through the system, and she's like, you know what, I am a master manipulator and I'm just so hot and cool and awesome, and I'm gonna show all these people that they shouldn't have wronged me and they shouldn't have overestimated me, you know. And then there's those little guys in the background championing her on because they both love her, and I love that for them. And that's The Remnant Chronicles. Low-key. Also, if you want to read Dance of Thieves, I honestly didn't enjoy Dance of Thieves duology as much as The Remnant Chronicles. I remember on TikTok, everyone was raving about them, and they were like, yes, it's the best enemies to lovers fantasy. And I didn't even know that it was like a sequel duology to The Remnant Chronicles, which like I had read. And I didn't know that it had a follow-up series, you know? And no one on TikTok was telling me that there was that it was the follow-up series, you know. They were all just like, nah, just read this duology, as if like they just expect you to again know all about the world building. But again, that one is one like, I don't think you even need to read The Remnant Chronicles to go in with any massive knowledge about the world building. They kind of just tell you, and it's not too complicated. Like the magic system and stuff isn't complicated at all, because it's not as much magic as it is like being spiritually in tune with like your ancestors kind of vibe, you know. But that one was like enemies to lovers. Like she goes in to do some sort of negotiation, political, not assassination, but like low-key, like, and then somehow her and this guy end up kidnapped together, and then they go on this whole journey where they like return to the town together, but they're like tied together, like they're chained together. So on the way home, you know, they like kind of low-key fall in love, but then they get home and they're like, politically, we can't really be together, and I don't know if I can trust you. And it was interesting and it was fun, and I gave it 4 stars. So if you are interested in that, I would say read that one as well. You know, there's then speaking of Fae again, let's bring back the Fae. A really fun, kind of interesting Fae fantasy novel that I read that is actually a standalone for once is An Enchantment of Ravens by, I think it's Maggie something. Margaret Rogerson. I was close with Maggie. So it's about a painter, and she's human, and she always paints portraits of the Fae, which is kind of like, I mean, the Fae, if you don't know the Fae lore, Fae are often like, they're very like tricksters, but they can't lie. But they still manage to trick you by telling you like white lies and like, you know, lies of omission, that kind of thing. So they can't directly lie, but obviously they're tricking you, and they're very like dangerous people. Like if you do something wrong, they're not gonna be happy. Like they'll curse you with some crazy curse that you don't want. And so basically, she paints portraits of them in order to kind of make a living and like barter in her town, etc. Because they crave the human craft. That's often another thing in Fae lore, is that it's like they just love human creation. Like they love paintings, they love like dancers or people who like play instruments to the point where like if you're really good at the violin, they might just kidnap you and keep you in their castle so that you can play the violin for them whenever they want. And you'll slowly lose your mind and all sense of reality, but it's okay because you're just so talented, and just take it as a compliment, you know? And that's kind of just like, that's just the Fae, you know? So because they like art, they like getting portraits of themselves from her, she ends up doing one for the Autumn Prince, who is Fae, and like who no one has like really seen in like the longest time. And she makes a deadly mistake because she paints mortal sorrow in his eyes, because she can really just see into his soul. She's like, wow, there's so much sadness there, and she accidentally paints that in his eyes, which would make him seem really weak, and obviously he doesn't like that, so he's really furious, and he takes her away to the kingdom to stand for her trial. But on the way to his kingdom, they're literally just attacked from like every side, like everyone's just coming at him, you know. But low-key, then they like fall in love along the way. And I really like this one because its take on the Fae was really interesting. Obviously, having read various novels about the Fae before, you do kind of get those recurring themes of like the Fae lore that I mentioned, but like some of the stuff that this one was on about was really creative in its way of like describing the Fae, and like it was very descriptive, and the world building of the Fae was just quite unique. I mean, maybe I just haven't read one like it, but I personally thought that it was really like creative and ingenuitive and just interesting. There was a lot to do with like them being able to control their features and like trying to perfect, like something was something was always off, in the sense that you could always tell that they were Fae, whether that was like their eyes being like cat eyes, or like having, I don't know if that makes sense. I'm not explaining it very well in a way that makes it seem like you want to read it, but it was just a very unique way of portraying the Fae that I really liked, and I liked the world building aspect. The actual plot was okay. I do think there's a portion of it where they are just being attacked like left, right, and center on this journey, and it gets a bit old a bit quickly. But it doesn't last for too long, and then once you kind of get into the next section of the book, like it picks up a lot, and you're like, okay, this is cool. I also read it while I was like stuck in an airport for hours, and it was like midnight, so that probably also did inform my enjoyment of it. But overall, it was really good, and I recommend if you want a little standalone novel. I rated it 4 stars overall, and I did give it a little written review on Goodreads if you want to have a look at that. It's not long and it's not interesting, but it's there. The one, my final one that I will recommend for like the YA section of this video is Heartless by Marissa Mayer, who I mentioned previously. And it is a Alice in Wonderland retelling from the perspective of the Red Queen. That's what she's called, right? Like the Queen of Hearts. Yeah, her. It's really well written. So it's set obviously like in Wonderland, and she starts off as like a baker, and all she wants to do is like be a really good baker. And then she meets a joker, and they kind of fall in love, and then obviously she becomes the Red Queen, and it's all about the way it like ties in the lore, if you will, of Alice in Wonderland, and like sneakily finds reasons to be like, and this is why she paints over roses, and this is why this happens, and like here's this character, like here's a bit of their backstory, bet you didn't know that they had met before Alice in Wonderland, that kind of thing. Like it was really fascinating and it was really fun, but the one thing that really stood out to me about it was that the way that she started to like get a crush on the male love interest was like accurate to like what I myself had experienced. I feel like sometimes when I read a novel, I don't know if other people feel this way, but when I read romance between two characters in a novel, I never really relate to like the ways in which they fall in love. You know what I mean? Like it's all like, oh, they looked at me and there was butterflies in my stomach, and you know, oh, there was so much tension, because I think a lot of the time they do a lot of sexual tension, and being asexual, like admittedly, I don't really feel that, and so the way I, you know, start to like people is very different, but I'm like, I imagine that people who aren't asexual also start getting like romantic crushes on people, and it's not all just like the sexual tension and like we just want to kiss and we just want to bang and make out all the time, and you're so fit and I'm so fit and we should be together, you know. So the way that she wrote this one, I was actually like, wait, this kind of like matches up with my experience, because it was a lot of like thinking of them when they weren't there and being like, I really want to see them again, and like thinking of like, you know, what they would say when you did something, or like that's the bit that really stands out to me, is that I was like, actually this is really like, this really reflects how my crushes tend to feel, and I like that aspect of it a lot. Yeah, give it a read if you want to. It's a standalone. I enjoyed it. 4 stars. Moving on to some adult fantasy, we'll start with She Who Became the Sun duology. I literally finished this duology yesterday, and low-key it's what also partially inspired me to make this video, because it was so good and it was so immersive. It's about this girl whose father and brother and mother, they all die really early on in her childhood, but prior to them dying, her and her brother, this is the one that's by the way, sorry, it's set in China in the like 1300s, so it is a very much, to be honest, there is fantasy elements in this book and there is like magic, but it is like the vaguest, it's the vaguest magic. I'm sorry, like, could it really be counted as a fantasy? Honestly, you could probably just count it as like historical fiction. But I went into it thinking it was a fantasy, and it has a lot of fantasy elements that you find in other books, even if it doesn't have a magic system. So I'm keeping it in because I really enjoyed it, and I think it's worth reading, and mentally it fits into that category in my brain. Again, could you really consider it high fantasy? I don't know, because it is technically set in China. So that is a real place, actually, in the world, if you didn't know. This girl and her brother, they get sent off to this like seer fortune teller who basically tells them like what their future holds. And for the boy, basically like he's like, yeah, you're gonna be great, you're gonna be like so famous, you literally like, you're coming into greatness, my friend, like you're going places, you know. And then for the girl, she's like, no, I don't see anything in your future. And obviously the girl's like, well, that's not great, because it means I'm probably gonna die. The brother's like 11, she's like 9, right? And then her dad dies, and it's just her and her brother left, and it's like her brother just gives up on life, and he's like, do you know what, I don't want to be here anymore. And like by pure will of his spirit, he kind of just dies, you know. And she's like, well, that don't make no sense, because I was the one that was supposed to die and you were the one that's supposed to go into greatness. But you know what, I'm gonna take your destiny and I'm gonna steal your fate, and from now on I will be known as Shu Chongba, and I'm gonna go and get greatness. And so she pretends to be a man, and goes off to like a monastery and stays in the monastery, but eventually starts joining like the Red Turbans, which is like a political group fighting for whatever they're fighting for, land and power and what most people fight for, I suppose, in these kind of scenarios. But obviously she's pretending to be a man, and so that is one of the really key things about this duology that I really loved so much, is that there's such a focus on like gender roles, because she's not the only character that kind of bends gender roles in that sense. You also have a eunuch who, if you didn't know, because I literally was so confused like the whole time in the first one, because I didn't actually know what a eunuch is. I don't know if that's like crazy to say and whether I was just like really ignorant and uneducated, but it's basically a man who had his penis and balls dropped off from a young age, and therefore like it actually impacts you biologically and physically, because in my brain I was like, that wouldn't do anything though, like surely like you're fine. But no, like it means that like he looks kind of feminine, and like his voice is light because his balls obviously wasn't able to drop, and he wasn't able to get a deep voice, and he wasn't able to like, so he looks kind of feminine in nature because biologically that's possible. Okay, you're with me. But he's like and also eunuchs were treated kind of like slaves and stuff, but because he's so talented and hot and cool, they raised him in status, and he became a general in an army because he was like besties with this guy, which there's also like queer tension between, which is fantastic. Like well written in that sense, and like I enjoyed it personally. And so he's in this position of power, but obviously everyone kind of looks down on him because he's got like womanly features and he's not a real man, and like you should be a slave. And then there's also this other character who is straight, but as a way to like defy everyone and be like, do you know what, you all think I'm gay, so I'm just gonna act gay anyway. He basically goes off and does that. So you've got a lot of like people who are bending the gender roles and like what's expected of them in society, but they're the leading forces of the novel, and it's actually showing like actually they are able to be what they are because of their differences, not instead of. And that's kind of like a whole character arc that Zhu goes throughout the novel, is that kind of thing of like she thinks I need to be a man, and I'm really annoyed that I'm not a man, because if heaven sees that I'm not actually my brother, they're gonna take away my greatness from me, and like that's really bad. But then actually she realizes throughout that one of the only reasons she can reach such level of greatness is because she's not a man, and because she's able to get different perspectives, and she's almost able to look at it from both sides and be like, well, I've kind of lived in a man's world, but I also remember what it's like to be a woman and be looked over. And you've got like women's perspectives as well, so it goes through all these characters' perspectives. And I know a lot of people were like, oh, every time I left Shu's perspective, like I zoned out and I was bored, but I personally really enjoyed all of the different perspectives, and I thought it gave a really nice, like, I don't know, like it made the story really interesting, because you were seeing all of this political stuff go down from like three different perspectives and like three fighting sides of this like political atmosphere. And like again, like to begin with, you're like, oh my god, this is kind of confusing, but like trust me, like by book 2 you were like, okay, I get it, I get what's going on here. And yeah, it was just really excellently written, and I approved a lot. It is queer, so there's like a lesbian relationship in it, which I love and was the reason why I read it. Most of the books you'll find I've recommended, not all of them, but a lot of the books I do tend to read are queer, just because that's my demographic, and so I'm gonna read what I want to read, and that just tends to be what I read, and therefore that's what I'm recommending you. But personally I think that makes a book better, but it is why I read it. But it's not like a romance subplot by any means. Like genuinely the love interest in like book 2 just doesn't show up for like half of it, because that's not the focus of the book, is not to explain their romance. It's to talk about this really political, like it's very, very political in the sense that like, a lot of fantasy books are, but this one is like very heavily in the politics, because it is kind of more of a historical fiction in the sense of like, and all of these people were fighting. Yeah. But very, very good. I highly recommend. I then have The Poppy War. This is my favorite book series of all time. It's by R.F. Kuang. If you don't know who R.F. Kuang is, you're kind of living under a rock, my friend, because she's like one of the top authors going right now. She wrote Babel, if that rings any bell, Yellowface, which you may have seen on the shelves, and she's coming out with Catabasis later this year, and I'm so excited. But that one's very similar to the Poppy War in the sense that it's set in China, or like influenced by Chinese history, so it's not quite China, but it kind of is. Does that make sense? This one's different from She Who Became the Sun in the sense that there's a lot more of a kind of magic system, which is rooted in kind of spirituality and like being influenced by the pantheon of gods, and like you're kind of, what's it called, like sponsored by one of the pantheon members. You're kind of sponsored by one of the pantheon members, and because of that you get like powers, but it's not like the best thing in the world. It's not like great to be sponsored by a pantheon, because you do kind of start losing your mind slowly but surely, and you almost start becoming that pantheon member, and sometimes those pantheon members do not want the best for the world, and they actually kind of want to low-key take over and like burn the whole place down, and so when that happens, like you get sent off to a mountain, and like that's just a whole thing, like don't worry about that, but it is a lot more focused on like the like magical aspect of it, but it is very similar in the sense that there's a lot of like political warfare, and like you're kind of in the mind of the politics, and there's this girl who you're following, who just is incredibly powerful but also kind of morally grey, and it does not shy away from the brutalities of war, and that is one thing I will say, like check trigger warnings before you read this one. And She Who Became the Sun. She Who Became the Sun does not shy away from the brutalities of war, and does show you very morally grey characters who do not have a problem with sacrificing members of their army and like killing random people, you know, and innocent people. Like they're like, no, anything for my destiny, you know what I mean? But the Poppy War goes like a step beyond that, and is very graphic in the way that it presents war, and it's kind of really disheartening because it is influenced by genuine things that have happened in history in war, you know what I mean, like in the sense of like entire towns being pillaged and like women being raped, and like a lot of that really obviously horrific stuff, which is based in truth, unfortunately. So you do kind of read it and you're like, this is terrible, but at the same time, though, it's a very incredibly immersive series, and you really do just get sucked into the world building of it. Like, I think I was like 50 pages to 100 pages into the first one, and I just immediately knew that this was going to be like an incredible series that I was going to rate 5 stars, and it was going to become my favorite thing ever, because I was just immediately hooked into what was happening, and everyone was very compelling, and the relationships were written extremely well. There is a lot of people try to market it as a bit of like a enemies to lovers romance with like a bit of a romance subplot, but very similar to the last one. It's there, but it's not the focus of the novel at all. So don't go into it expecting a romance subplot, because it's not by any means. It's just kind of like a potential romance that might happen that is kind of explored, but it really is not focused on that. Like, I cannot stress that enough. It is very heavily focused on like the politics and stuff, and low-key that's what a lot of high fantasy is. It's very political often. So if you don't like political fantasy, I'm sorry, I do. So a lot of my fantasy recommendations are gonna have political elements in them, because I just like being like, oh, interesting, and oh, what's your motivation behind that? And yeah, but very morally grey characters, lots of horrific graphic descriptions of horrible things, but incredibly great world building, very immersive storytelling, great written relationships between the characters. I cannot recommend it enough. I think it is an incredible series. I don't think I will ever read anything better. Please read it. I think it will do you good. Another one that I then will recommend is the Burning Kingdom series, which is like the Jasmine Throne. That's the first one, if that rings more of a bell. This one is by Tasha Suri, and it's influenced by South Asian mythology. I'm not quite sure which area of South Asia. Let me check quickly. But it is set in like that kind of part of the world, or like, again, not exactly that part of the world, but like inspired by that part of the world, like that kind of general setting. Okay, it is inspired mainly by Indian and Hindu traditions, if AI overview is anything to believe and trust, which I don't typically think it is, but for the sake of time, we're just gonna believe them. And so yeah, this one I rated the whole series 5 stars. Not necessarily like, it's one of those ones where I enjoyed it probably to a 4-star degree, but I just couldn't deny the fact that it was so masterfully written, and therefore I was obligated to give it a 5 stars, because the world building is genuinely so interesting and incredible and unique, and I've never read a fantasy like it with that kind of style of world building. Because obviously I kind of said before, you've got the ones that are like, okay, I'm setting it in a fae world, but I'm gonna put a new spin on it, or I'm setting it, as a retelling of things like Alice in Wonderland or fairy tales. But this one was very unique, and I was just like, I've never read something like it before. It was very linked with nature and a lot of like being in tune with nature, and that was what a lot of the magic system was. It's hard to describe, but there's basically like, it starts in a land called Ahrani, who are controlled by Parijatvipa, who basically like kind of, they like, Ahirani used to have independence but no longer because Parijatvipa took over. And then they had like a magic system in Ahirani based on like religion and spirituality and nature, that is different to Parijatvipa's one. And Parijatvipa's one is based on like these mothers and like sacrificing women, so it's not great. It's a very kind of like feminist trilogy actually, but yeah, so these kind of sacrifice women and it's not great. And this emperor goes to sacrifice his sister, and she's like, actually, Loki, I don't want to burn to death. And they're not really happy about that, so they send her off to Ahrani to kind of like live in this, what used to be like a religious home for all of these religious group of people, but has now just kind of become like an abandoned tower. And then this girl, who is one of the only remaining ones with these kind of powers left over from that religious group who used to live in that tower, ends up hired to look after this like princess, emperor's sister. And there's a romance subplot, I'll leave it there, a queer one if you will, because I love me women getting together, and any book that has that's a fantasy, I will immediately read. You don't need to tell me twice, like I've picked it up, I'm reading it, I'm there. And yeah, it's just incredibly well written. There is again a lot of political influences, because that's what I like in my fantasy, but it is very well worth the read. It's not as much based on politics. There's a lot of more like, I suppose, like battle sequences, so it's less of like the mind games of war and more of like, I'm gonna get in and fight. And it follows multiple perspectives, sometimes where you're like, it was kind of unnecessary, and I do understand people's point when it's like, why are we throwing in random perspectives, like can we keep it contained to like 2 people? But it tells the perspective of like whoever needs to at that given moment. Do you know what I mean? In the same way that She Who Became the Sun does as well. But again, I think that it just fleshes out the world. But sometimes it can get to the point where you're like, I just want to go back to the 2 girls who love each other. Like, I don't give a about the rest of y'all, But they are there for a good reason, and they do flesh out the story, and they do kind of help move things along. So you kind of have to give them credit where credit's due, But yeah, incredibly interesting, incredibly different, I would say, and unique. And well worth the read. It's just really, I just love it. I really think it's so well crafted and well done. And so I highly recommend it. So there's 2 kind of ones remaining that I will recommend, but you're gonna have to bear with me because it's been quite a while since I read them, so I don't remember a lot about them. But the first is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is about, it's very ambiguous, kind of, this one. It's a standalone, it's quite slim and short, but it's really intriguing. I don't know if you could really say it's fantasy. It's almost like, I went into it thinking it was Greek mythology inspired, but it's not really. But it has that kind of vibe of like, there's this person, this creature, like you don't even really know what they are. They themselves don't know what they are. They've forgotten so much of what they've done and where they've been. All they've know is like this incredibly complex building with so many floors and so many different rooms, and like they know like this room floods at this hour and this room has like random paintings in it, and they've been alone until all of a sudden like they're not alone, and they're like, something's going on here, and then they're like slowly kind of discovering and re-remembering themselves and like why they're there. And it's very interesting and very unique and kind of like a very much trust the process. Like you're reading it and you're just kind of like, I don't really know what's happening, but one day it'll all become clear. And it kind of does. And it's just really interesting and really fascinating. Again, not too much of a fantasy, but in that kind of realm, if that makes sense, because it's not accurate to real life. I personally don't find myself stuck in rooms that become flooded at certain times with magical kind of elements and I've forgotten who I am. You know, like that's kind of magical. It's kind of fantastical, if you will. And then my final one, The Priory of the Orange Tree. I have read that one, but again, it's been quite a while. I haven't read, they've got a prequel to it. It's by Samantha Shannon. They've got a prequel to it, which I own, but I haven't read yet because I'm waiting for the summer. I felt like that was these ones are like massive, like for context. Priory of the Orange Tree is like probably over 800 pages long, and I think this other one is as well. And so I was like, I don't think I quite have room to pack that to take to uni, so I'm waiting until the summer to read that. And honestly, I feel like I kind of need to reread Priory of the Orange Tree as well. I probably don't, like, I think both of them work so that they can be consumed as standalones, but there's still a part of me that's like, but I want to know, like, I want to re-remember, because also, yeah, I read Priory of the Orange Tree roundabout probably when it came out, like 2021 time, maybe 2022, so I was like 16, and I feel like now that I'm older I would like appreciate it more than I did back then. Not that I didn't appreciate it, like I still enjoyed it and I thought it was like masterfully written and that it was incredibly good, but considering I forgot so much of it, I'm like, I just want to reread it so I can like rediscover the masterpiece that it was, you know. Is queer as well. It follows multiple perspectives. It's set in this land. There's dragons. There's people training to be fighters. There's queens and maidservants who kind of, you know, become friends, if you will, and are fighting for political power. And it is very well done and very well crafted. And you should read it. And thus ends my video. I've been filming for like over an hour. I do this to myself all the time. Like, I'm not cohesive. I'm not coherent. I should probably go into videos with notes on what I'm going to say. But I don't. I just kind of fly by the seat of my pants and then end up ranting for for way too long. And then I'm editing it and I'm like, hey, I don't know what you expect me to cut and stitch here. But go you, I guess, you know. And yeah. Thank you all for joining me today. I will try and get this out as soon as I possibly can. But I hope you enjoyed. I hope this gives you some inspiration.